Well, good evening and welcome to the June 14th Committee of the Whole of Common Council. Our agenda item tonight is to have a discussion on the city manager. We have a guest with us tonight, Dr. Ian Coyle, the consultant with whom we have been working and will be working to move forward. Just for the benefit of the listening public, I will reiterate some of the dates, some of the information that was covered at the May 31st Committee of the Whole meeting. Reminder to all that it was Common Council in 2021 that researched and developed a resolution to look at and propose change to the structure of our city government. That structure change to a council manager structure changes the authority, the responsibility of the mayor, and therefore must go to referendum, which it did in November 2022. The referendum passed with a 73% approval rating. So clearly voters recognize that this shift in city government structure will result in better effectiveness and efficiency as we move forward. When we met on May 31st, we discussed our goals in that meeting was to look at the role and responsibility of the mayor, of Common Council, and of the city manager. And tonight, I'm very glad that Dr. Ian Coyle has agreed to be with us in person rather than over Zoom. It is very nice to see you here in person. And before I turn it over to Ian, I would appreciate just going around and having council members introduce themselves. You can let Ian know what ward you represent in the city. So I'll start with Ward 1, Cynthia.
Hi, Ian, I'm Cynthia Brock. I represent Ward 1, which is West Hill, South Hill, Spencer Road, West End, and Maple Estates neighborhoods. I also serve as the chair of the Ithaca Area Wastewater Treatment Plant Board and the chair of the Tompkins County Water Resources Council. I serve on the Planning and Economic Development Committee.
Hi, my name is George McGonigal. I also serve the residents of the first ward. I'm on the city administration committee. The first ward is 40% of the land mass of the city. Very well ward.
I'm Dustin Witt. I serve the second ward, which is most of the flats except for Fall Creek currently. There's significant take effect next year, and but it's basically downtown and surrounding areas.
I'm Phoebe Brown, and I also represent Ward 2. You know, whatever Dustin said.
Hi, Ian. Rob Gerhart, representing the third ward, which covers a chunk of East Hill and the neighborhoods of Bryant Park and Bell Sherman, and currently a big chunk of the Cornell campus. And I'm serving in my 8th year of Common Council, 8th and final year, and also chair the Planning and Economic Development Committee, but also have sat on the City Administration Committee.
I'm Jeff Barkin, Bob's counterpart in the third ward, but I'm actually stepping down to be one of the last meetings here. So I won't add too much to the discourse, but you have some insights. So thanks.
Hi, I'm Tiffany. I represent the 4th ward, which is College Town and a lot of Cornell's campus. I also currently sit on the Planning and Economic Development Committee. This is my first year in council.
Hello, my name is Jorge DiFedini. I represent Fourth Ward alongside Tiffany, second year on council, and I sit on the City Administration Committee.
Hi, again, I'm Robert Quintono. I represent Fifth Ward, which is Fall Creek, Cornell Heights, and a good chunk of East Hill campus area. And I sit on City Administration Committee with Chair.
Thank you. And our 10th member of council is currently working on a road race that has probably been canceled given the thunder and lightning and rain. But nevertheless, she will have opportunity to review this. We are recording the meeting as well as streaming it live. So you'll be able to look at this afterwards. So once again, Ian, welcome, and I will turn it over to you for introductions.
Sounds good. Well, it's nice to meet all of you. Thank you. I will have to pass on the sweets and treats for the time being, but if there's any left, I'll probably take some after. So thank you for that. We're gonna queue up sort of like that next slide, shtick. So bear with me on that if you could. So we will move to the next one. If it flips over. Okay, so there we go. So this is just the agenda. Wanted to review this. I'll introduce myself in just a minute, but just to set the table on the planned discussion as far as the agenda, reviewing the needs assessment, what are considered the deliverables of the phase 1 engagement as the city prepares for sourcing, finding the very first city manager for the city. Talk a little bit about the results of that. Get in a little bit to the position description and position profile and next steps, but in any sort of interval of any of this, there's no prescribed format as far as any Q&A or anything like that. I left time at the end, hopefully, but anything that comes up during the time that I'm talking, just feel free to chime in and ask me any question or clarification. I hopefully will be able to provide that. So just an introduction for who I am and where I'm coming from. So I come from Livingston County, New York, which is Western Finger Lakes. Geneseo is the county seat. We're a county of about 65,000 people. I am the county administrator, so akin pretty much to the city manager or a city administrator. I've been with the county for 15 years. I've been in the field of local government management for 20 years. My master's is actually in public administration, but specialization in local government management. And my doctorate is in public sector management. So I sort of went to school to what I ended up becoming. I also teach. I teach future and present city managers and county managers. I teach public administration, budgeting, public management, ethics, leadership, things of that nature. So I'm very sort of involved in the profession. I'm a very strong proponent of the profession. When I say the profession, I mean city or county or town or village professional administration. I do use the term in like what I would say the purest form. So folks take myself, I'm registered to vote, but I'm not affiliated with a political party. So as the Board of Elections call me a blank, I'd rather something else, but I guess I'm considered a blank in their vernacular. So I don't attend any political functions. I don't make political donations. I stay completely out of that sort of element of the world of government, and I'm strictly and solely there to be a practitioner of local government administration. For Academic Partners is my solo consultancy, so it's just me. So I have an employment agreement with the county. So just for some context, I have an employment agreement with the county that allows me to both consult and teach. So it's just been something that's been in my contract for a few years now. I've been asked to do a lot of different engagements over the years. I decline as many as I accept just from a time and resource intensity perspective, but I do very much like getting involved in all things local government in New York in particular. I grew up in a city, the city of Buffalo. I really have a strong affinity for cities in general. So I was glad to kind of come in here and see, construction and tight streets in one ways and kind of the grit of the city that I was sort of used to seeing when I grew up, because I'm in more of a rural area at this point in time, living in Livingston County. For academic, it's a play on words, practitioner and academic, because I've had for 15 years a foot in the world of academia teaching. I teach mostly online at this point in time, but presently for Tulane University, Northern Illinois University, and University of Virginia. Association involvement. When you get to the world of the city and county management, you have a couple of different groups. One is the International City County Management Association, ICMA. There's other affiliated groups like the National League of Cities, the National Civic League, And also the county counterparts are really just enmeshed and embedded in all those groups as well. They weren't initially, it was really city focused initially, but as counties professionalized their administrative functions in government, they kind of got invited to the table many decades ago. So now they're sort of in the fold. I bring that up because I'm very involved in the association, kind of have a good sense of what's going on with professional management. I've spoken at many cities, including Buffalo, Saratoga Springs, and others that have contemplated but not advanced the form of government. And I've certainly followed Ithaca and some others that have gotten to the point where they've advanced it. I am working with the city of Portland right now. I worked with them on a city administrator search. So it's Director of Finance and Administration doing business as a city administrator. And they have the goal to do just like you did, I think, at this point in time. They want to do a referendum, a charter change. They want to have a governance structure change in the city of Portland to change that to a council manager form of government. So I'm working with them post executive search, because they have a person in that role that they want to then make the city manager. Recent engagements, just to kind of give you a feel and flavor. I stole one of your own, or I helped the community steal one of Tompkins' own, Amy Hendricks, who is the city manager in Geneva. I was the executive search consultant for the city of Geneva and Ontario County on that search. Recently in the city of Cortland, also involved right now with the county of Seneca, which is Waterloo, a very small county, 32,000 population between the two Finger Lakes there. Working with them on a county manager search at this point in time. Primarily the consultancy engagements that I am involved with are usually executive search, but sometimes coaching or just general consulting. I only do a handful per year, so I try to make them very, customized and, as nimble as the entity needs me to be to serve the end goals of whatever you wish to accomplish. So in this case, it's to, which I'll talk about in phase one, is to really set the table on what will end up being the search for the first city manager in Ithaca. I wanted to just spend a moment on trends in city county manager recruitments because I think it's an important point. There has been a little bit of a change of late. The great resignation, the great, whatever you want to call it, reset, attraction, whatever Forbes said, no matter what it is, it's always great, but really not. So it's not so great. City management and county management has seen that as well. So search profiles, candidates that come out, the pools of candidates, I think used to be a little bit more robust, more count certainly. So I think that is something just to take into account. Also, the newness factor, I think, is an important piece to this particular, what will end up being a search, meaning it's the first city manager. So there's an element of intrigue there. I also think you have city of Ithaca with a national reputation that other cities of a similar population size and demographic would not necessarily be able to say. So that will be, I think, an attraction point to the prospective candidate pools that will be your applicants to the city manager position. So that's just something to consider. Next slide, please. Okay, so I wanted to really just do a reset. Thank you for moving that. Just do a reset on the phase one deliverables. So phase one is really a preparation, readiness strategy. You can call it different things, but it's gaining all the inputs from staff, primarily from council, the mayor, with respect to where do we want to go? What are the challenges? It's not a traditional SWOT in the relationship of a strategic planning exercise, but it's more of the lay of the land, what's going on in the community. What are some needs operationally that have been identified by staff or by council? What's the future hold? Those type of things, because when you go to recruit a city manager, you want to be able to show all of those things that are going on, initiatives, endeavors, and frankly, challenges as well. What is that person going to be walking into? What's ahead? What's on the docket? What are in plans? What are in studies? What's the council want to endeavor to do moving forward? Those type of things. But also it's the main purpose of the effort is to arrive at a coalescence around desired skill sets, competencies, characteristics of a city manager. Like, what do you want? What's really important to the group? What is shown as maybe a gap area that you would hope that the city manager may bring some skills into the fold to help lead the efforts. And I'll mention that the city manager position is, I'm a strong proponent of it. I think it's a great idea. I think that you will be well served by having a city manager with that's competent and professional and nonpartisan and practitioner. But at the end of the day, they are a cog in the wheel, myself included, for my role, you know, a cog in the wheel to make the overall government work. And that starts with the residents electing council, that's council, policy direction, strategy, initiatives, where we want to go. And the manager is there to sort of quarterback and lead the efforts to make that happen. So just to make a sort of an overarching comment about that, it's an extremely important position. I think it's a meaningful change that the city has made, but it is also just one person, you know, and it's one move that you have made in the right direction, I think, from a professionalism standpoint, but it's still one move. So there's a lot on the one shoulders, whoever that will be.
Would you be interested in the position?
No, no, with all due respect, no, I would not. I did tell someone on the way down who was actually my counterpart in Tompkins County, Jason Molino. So he works in Livingston County now, as an executive director of a water and sewer authority. We went to grad school together, so we go way back. But I was talking to him on the way down about a Livingston County matter, and I told him where I was headed. And I said that it would be a fantastic opportunity for someone. And I don't say that just to, you know, it really because of the opportunities to make a difference, be of impact, all the things going on, the pedigree of the city itself. And actually, I say that with the notations of the challenges. I mean, so let alone the awesome stuff you got going on. But I mean, if you like doing the work and you want to kind of get down to, like, you know, helping this council fix problems and deliver services and deliver them well and efficiently, effectively, it should be a very attractive opportunity to someone. So, but I don't mean that, you know, disparagingly. It's not me. But where we are about with kids in high school and not ready to move and stuff like that. At some point down my life, it definitely would be though. Yeah. Go to the next slide. Thanks. Okay, so the purpose of a needs assessment. The qualifiers here, before I get into what kind of came out of, well, I'll get what came out of the needs assessment, but this is the purpose of it. The qualifiers are, the way that I construct these is organizational from an internal perspective, but also community from an external perspective. So because the city manager is coming into a government that serves the public. So what is going on in the public? What is going on in the realm of public services, making their mark or maybe potentially missing their mark on the perceptions of the staff and the council. So it's when you see this, it's more than just what do we want in the city manager? What should you know be as far as competencies and characteristics and skill sets? It's also what is going on in the city proper itself, and that was purposeful to include those elements because, and I'll explain why a little bit further. But I just want to sort of qualify that up front as to the reasoning why those things like what does success look like, things like what are the challenges in the community. There was a reason and a distinct purpose for including those because I think it helps inform the overall situational awareness and analysis that allows you to set up properly for a search for a city manager. So these are kind of all one clicks, but you can just click all the way through them because I can just kind of other ones. Yeah, just keep going until you.
So the page goes on.
Yeah, exactly. And then go back to what the page looks like. Yeah. Okay, so it should be like maybe 2 or 3 more. So just wanted to go over these. This is really the purpose. So if you were able to participate in the, I think that's it. If you were able to participate in the needs assessment as a council member, these were the things that were posed as questions. So what does success look like for the city long-term and short-term? What are important issues facing the city? Then you got into competencies, meaning organizational effectiveness, performance management, strategic planning, the management of people, human resources, employee relations. So you get into the key and common things that you're going to see as themes of the profiles of your prospective applicants. We also asked a little bit about organizational needs, like where do you think the city is in need of some things where the city manager might impart some help and assistance with or on. Also, what's working well, community challenges, what's working well, you know, you build off of those answers because, you know, it shines a light on maybe some success stories that you might be aware of or that you might not be aware of. Community challenges are there. And again, that's purposeful because you want to be able to show to the city manager what's ahead. And good city managers want to roll up their sleeves and help advance community. They want to develop the community. They want to develop economic development. They want to improve the human condition. If they're really good city managers, that's what they want to do, and that's what you want in the candidates that are going to be coming your way. Areas of opportunity as well, and characteristics is more singular to the actual city manager profile itself. So these are, these look a little common to if you've ever experienced an organizational SWOT analysis or a situational SWOT analysis. There's very much some commonality there with this needs assessment, but this is the purpose, and I'll then go through some of the results. Oh, yeah, another one. Actually, I got two more. I forgot. I butchered that. There's another one. So communication style, the other one should be leadership style. So communication style and leadership style were also asked of the survey recipients, both staff and council, what kind of style was sought after when you're talking about a city manager. So there's one more leadership style I mentioned here. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Again, if I may just jump in and let council know that this presentation will be shared with council, the slides will be shared with them.
So the general themes of the responses, I highlight in this, play on the Family Feud, but succession planning, R&R, I wish was rest and recuperation, but R&R is recruitment and retention, which is really the issue du jour for village all the way up to federal government. Post-COVID, private sector has rebounded to about a 97% clip on employment, where they were before the pandemic and where they are now. Government was still hovering in the 60s as far as a percentage. So there's very much a struggle that still exists, and a challenge that still exists on backfilling a lot of the positions, sort of right sizing and where you need to be from a personnel perspective. So that came out of both council and department directors. The key department vacancies that either are present or loom, making sure somebody's at the helm to sort of guide those along or assist in that. Recruitment and retention in general, with respect to staff, came up a couple of different times as far as the responses. Government operations and infrastructure came up because, really government operations is a common one that comes up in the city manager assessment, because the city manager at the end of the day is a COO of sorts, CEO, CAO, with A being administrative. So operational responsibilities, departmental level kind of funneling up, kind of guidance that, strategy that really authority should rest and be carried out by that city manager. So operations did come up as an element of the responses. Infrastructure came up, like focusing on it, how to fund it. Frankly, the challenges around both the funding of it and the timing of it and resources, but a focus on it and making sure that lens of focus, what I got out of the response is that remained in all the things that you've got going on as a city, that focus remained on infrastructure as well, sort of the core elements of public works. Yeah.
Either in the presentation or perhaps offline separately, would you be able to share partially disaggregated data between council and senior staff? Because I think it'd be very informative for council to get a sense of what our perceptions are relative to the senior staff. Thank you.
Yep.
Of course, still anonymized, obviously.
Sure. Yep. I can do that. Absolutely. Public safety came up. Police department, the initiatives of the reform plan, carrying out various reforms. That was an element of some of the responses. Housing homelessness. So talking about that for a second, both from serving the public to also having a community as best the city can control any of these factors, having a community that has an affordability quotient that's affordable for the residents that live in the city. But it's also the cost of housing that really the city doesn't control. And, the cost of housing as it goes up, in some ways, actually the sign of growth and development and economic, vitality of a community. But in some of the responses that came up that, that is a factor, and the perception I got in some of the responses was that that's a negative factor. The cost of housing is a concern. People can't afford to live in some houses and things of that nature. In addition to general, a couple of comments on homelessness in general and serving the public, and how does the city serve the public, and partnerships with the county in the area of folks who are potentially presenting as homeless in the city, in the community. Morale and culture and strategy as a recommended focus area for the city manager to, build that rapport with staff, to when there are elements to work on, if there are morale issues, to work on them and focus on them. To, build a culture of performance, to have that communicative style and nature with staff. Strategic plan came up. I'm not familiar with it, if you actually have a formal strategic plan that has been adopted by council. But the reference to a strategic plan did come up, and then the implementation, of course, thereof. One thing that definitely was shining through loud and clear was engagement. So that was the take I got from that was engagement, internal and external. So internal engagement with respect to staff, updates, collaboration, cooperation, overused corporate buzzword, apologies, but breaking down silos and things like that. But engagement to the public externally facing. There was a reference to public information and spreading the word, letting people know what the city's involved with. Kind of like the bang for the buck from a taxation perspective, where are my tax dollars going? How do you, besides all the endeavors that you have, and I'm sure you do press messaging and, there's minutes and there's public board meetings and there's presentations, but is there a level beyond that? Again, as I'm looking at that from an objective observer, that's what I was seeing, and sort of what role could the city manager play in that once they get going. That is a very common element in the purview of a city manager, is at least a base level focus on public information. So we do want to ask a question. Okay. What's next slide? So there was a question posed, what does success look like? So I'll talk about that. You can just go to the next one. That one, this is more of a title slide. Success is, and again, I tried to kind of place this in a nutshell because of the volume of the responses. So success, positions being filled, focusing on recruitment and retention. Certainly when we talk about finances, I'll get to it at the end, but when I asked about the key competencies and the general listing of 20 or 25 common traits of a city manager, the number one response was budgeting and financial acumen, having that good, base level background. I will tell you that is a very common response, probably the most common response. And it's also almost the most commonly expected responsibility area for a city manager. Like, yes, it's general operations and administration per se, but there's an expectation that they should have a really good sound foundation of budgeting and all things budgeting. So many city managers are the budget officer. In addition, control of the budget, development of the budget, presentation of the budget, almost like, the governor with the executive budget as a presentation, and the legislature vets it and comments on it. Housing affordability and economic development were prioritized. Obviously, individuals' definition of what economic development is differ depending on the individual, but that was a point of emphasis. One thing I do not note here, but I will make a comment on that. In situations both city and county, when I've been involved with a jurisdiction, especially when there's a new position being contemplated and created, I would have expected to see more naysaying perhaps, or more negatives in relation to the creation of the city manager position, because there's a newness factor there, when there's been other places like there's been more negative comments. So the fact that I didn't see that, I think, is a very promising sign as you kick something off, because I know it did pass with a very, very solid majority from the public. And that it would appear that there was very strong support, post facto from that, but seeing that was a very positive sign. I think it sets you up for success, because let's give an example. I am working in a community that just had an administrative position for a long time. Someone left, they chose not to fill it. 20 years, came back to backfilling it, and there's a whole slew of unrest about what this represents, and a lot of department directors not in favor of it, a split in the council. So I mean, but they're advancing it. So it's a challenge for them, but it's nice to see that exists here. Yeah.
I was just gonna ask, is it common that the other cities you've worked with, that they maintain the mayoral, role in addition to the city manager, or is that unique and significant?
I would say the majority are structured with a mayor. I would say, yeah, probably the vast majority.
I have,
Yep. George, oh, sorry.
I would add to that list of biggest important things of success is, the, public safety reimagining, really advancing and getting the police department on life support, basically. That's a big issue here.
yeah, yes, I do. I have a lot to say, but for one, I'm just trying to wrap my head around, because my head is still back in last week that the mayor, work dropped 75%, right? And right now, they only do 50%. So if you're only doing 50% and you drop 75%, why do we need a mayor? So that's one question I have real serious, like, what is the need of the mayor if the city manager is gonna be doing the majority of work? Is that just a figurehead? Is that something we're used to? So we wanna continue to have it. I also, yes, we really need to build our police department up to what this imagined. But we also need, very importantly, because you said something about external and internal, and we also need to be very clear that Executive Order 203 was talking about the people, right? First and foremost, and let's build them back to trusting us. That for one thing, because we're out there right now with this whole new reimagine. So and I'm more importantly than anything, and I know that's gonna come eventually, because we keep talking about money, how much is it gonna cost to have a city manager and a mayor?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me try to tackle some of those. But so obviously, some of them are not in my
Okay.
wheelhouse of responsibility to potentially opine on, but the ones that I can, I will. So so the question was posed of the majority have a mayor. So they usually have a council that includes a mayor. And I don't like this term. I know Ari is, I'm sure has seen this in some of the research. I don't like this term, but they have a strong mayor form of government and a weak mayor form of government. I never really liked that. I'd like that, a council manager form of government or non-council manager form of government, probably a little bit better. So the mayor, from a power perspective, still would retain, some powers in whatever the process looks like here. Certainly, as from a political perspective and the head of the policy making body. I mean, so the policy making body needs I guess you could say needs a head. So that person would be the head of the policy making body. As far as what gets distilled down to what the responsibility areas are, it's really up for the city. But again, in most examples I've seen, it's, the running the meeting, things like press event, yes, correct. So press events, things like political exercises, intergovernmental relations, some representation on committees external to the city. That's where you might find more commonly acceptable roles and responsibilities areas for the city that might have differed from what they used to be. But again, it's really up to the individual jurisdiction, what that city looks like. Excuse me, what the mayor responsibility looks like.
And we can recirculate that chart that was shown at May 31 Committee of the Whole that distinguish the responsibilities of the city manager, who will be the CEO of the city, and the mayor, who will be the policy head. And public facing, outward facing, the city manager will be working internally, the mayor will be
Working. And I just want to comment, I wasn't here when they brought it on, so I'm still looking
Sure.
and studying city manager and all that. That's just questions.
Sure, I see Jorge and George.
Also, and sort of to your point, Ms. Judy, about the 75% number, I know that it appeared on the chart presentation, but I'm not familiar if we got like a source on the sort of the mathematical breakdown of how that amounts to 75% itself. So I don't know how accurate that number is. I don't think we got like a solid understanding of like, well, responsibilities lying down, you know, it'll amount to 75. I think that number could vary, I believe, depending on what we decide to do and how the cards fold out. With my understanding of the situation, and correct me if I'm wrong.
We do have, some of that data
Okay.
that would support the apportionment of responsibilities between mayor and, city manager. And, if I may, Phoebe, to your point, it certainly is the case that currently the mayor's position is a part-time position. However, the expectation is, not always part-time, or the demands, I should say. And part of that is because we don't have, we have a chief of staff, a very good chief of staff. We don't have a city manager who has the authority. Right now, the authority rests with the mayor in terms of working with staff and making certain decisions that are made on a daily basis. George.
One way I like to look at it, Phoebe, this is to your point about, do we need a mayor or not? In this new form, the mayor will be a member of council who's elected by the entire city. So I think that's a positive thing.
As the mayor is now elected by the entire city.
Right.
The distinction is the mayor will have full vote. Whereas currently the mayor votes only when there's a tie. So it changes the number of voting members. On council. In that case.
Yeah, just follow up on what colleagues are saying here, right? Like, I'm thinking of looking at what the charter says going forward, right? In that, like, to your point from last meeting, Phoebe, about the constituent relations. I mean, that is really, it's good, of course, important for our city staff to be engaged in the community, but I think it really depends on us as elected officials and future elected officials to be doing the work of constituent relations. As Laura and others have mentioned, right, the existing mayor position is, I mean, even in the memo that council supported justifying change, right? Like, there's way more work than there is time for one person to do. And so the administrative things get prioritized, and maybe some constituent work, policy work, intergovernmental relations, advocacy or grants, things like that fall by the wayside. And I think that future delineation responsibility will be to our benefit.
Thank you. Oh, so if we want to right now return to Ian's, I'm sorry, did someone else have a question or comment? Chad?
No, I thought, but I was gonna, yep, I'm back on green. So, I was gonna finish my last point is that, not to shy away from it as far as costs. So, certainly a city manager is a new position into the city. A city manager comes with it, an expectation of a professional background, educational background that in 2023 dollars will be, a significant chunk of change. And I just, I don't think you should shy away from that. Well, at least for some, for some it might not be, it's all relative. So I think I don't know if we've gotten to that point yet as far as any ranges or things like that or any expectations, but certainly I will be able to assist down the road as far as that goes and have a pretty good handle on where things are across New York and areas. And I think Ithaca's cost of living as sort of like a micro economy would likely have to be factored in. I think what I would do is probably be looking at, it's not same exact position, they're not pulling from the same pool, so don't get me wrong, but school superintendents have less budget responsibility potentially, have less service scope potentially, and are paid and they're paid for by the same tax paying public that is going to be being asked to pay for your salary as a city manager. So you look to that, and then you look to, I'm sorry, I know you're, and then you look to sort of where a chief executive officer and an organizational size of your fiscal footprint, your organizational footprint should make. And, it starts to, be a pretty good number, a decent number as far as the starting salary, just to be honest on your question, there's gonna be cost to it. The hope is you find a manager that's worth their salt. And they are in turn, I don't make any promises to say like, if you pay them X amount of $1,000, they're gonna save you 2 or 3 ROI. That stuff doesn't work. However, but if you garner a tenth of the efficiency sought, it should be an ROI that is suitable and satisfactory to this community vis-a-vis the council.
And hopefully they would like to give us more too.
Just to add to that, I mean, I guess I would draw council's attention to like our recent compensation study where one of the positions, like the chief of staff is slightly overpaid relative to market rate. And the memo, the supporting legislation that council passed in 2021 actually said that like, the city manager might make slightly more than the chief of staff and the mayor may make slightly less. To represent that new division of responsibilities.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, that's helpful, although I think as Ian said, we don't have those ranges that number the scope of work of the mayor is considerably changed, and so I would anticipate that being.
Oh, yeah, I was only referring to like what council, of course, like message to the public and told them everybody to do, and then probably advocated for, and then put to vote, like we obviously, as we discussed, we want to change those things.
Oh, of course, yeah, of course.
I will say, just having looked at a fair amount of this, I think Ian's description of the sort of classic weak mayor model is pretty accurate in terms of what the city in fact implemented and what the public endorsed at referendum. So I think those will serve as useful benchmarks in terms of understanding.
I think we should have a better name. Yeah, I don't find that the mayor is weak in that. I feel like they're empowered to do other things, just from a power structure is a little bit different. And I think that's why it gets that.
Cynthia has another question.
Thank you. Just recognizing that I know you were mentioning looking at the school superintendent as sort of a corollary here. I believe the school district budget is about 50% larger than ours, and their district is significantly larger. We only contain a portion of the taxpaying entity that ICSD comprises, so just to put that out there,
Sure,
it's
yeah.
not quite apples to apples.
Yeah, no, understood. Yeah, and I didn't intend it to mean that way. I just, sort of as an example of a position that is in the public, and I didn't mean just ICSD, just superintendents in general in, maybe this area. That's often a look at point for a public sector entity that's contemplating a CEO type. That's all. Fair point. Totally understand where you're coming from. Yeah. So 4, 5, 6. Just to wrap up this slide, move on. The success was defined as a smooth transition for the form of government. It's not. There's not a ton of brand new city manager positions created. I mean, if they've had them, they've usually had them. And if there's a vacancy, there's an established trend, or there's an established norm or set of norms and forms. So I think that people identified in the survey that smooth transition as being a type of success. And certainly the positive, productive relationship and the dynamic. You'll hear me say this a couple of different times. The best example I ever heard on this was composer conductor. So the composition of the policy, the composition of the initiatives, the strategic planning, the big picture undertakings, I'm the representative of the residents in my ward or community, and this is what I'm hearing from the people, and this is what I'd like the city to do. And the city manager and the staff are charged with carrying that out, sort of conducting that policy that's been composed by the council. That's really how the form of government is supposed to work. That's why it was first identified as a workable form of government so many, moons ago. And that's why it's, for a city of a certain size, probably the most popular form of government nationally for that reason. I know that was all under study and probably helped support the vote when it was taken. And then I think engagement came out a lot. I think people identified that an enhancement potentially for messaging efforts and engagement and what the city is doing with the community would be a wise move and successful. So then we shifted to organizational needs. You can go to the next one. The highlights of the organizational needs. So these are more so within the walls and within the confines of the city government proper. So not necessarily the city community conditions. or needs, but certainly the needs of like the organization, so, the operational stuff. Resource allocation, so placing the, requisite amount of dollars, and look, I know, departments and council members both are gonna have particular areas of focus. I mean, that certainly exists everywhere. Certainly if I'm a department manager and I feel like I'm under budgeted, my answer track might be, and I need more resource allocated to my department. But resource allocation in general, the highlight, you've heard me say this a couple of different times, and I think there's a reason for that. Staffing, filling positions, adequately staffing, again, someone's version of the word adequately is different depending on who's talking to who. Adequately staffing, building in succession plans, career paths. So when you hire somebody in Ithaca into a position, what do they know about what life might look like ahead for them, work life look like ahead for them in 2, 3, 4, 5 years? Do they have a defined opportunity to promote? If not, why not? Those are some things that, from an organizational perspective, I think would potentially be good to address for the city manager and the staff. Certainly as a city in New York, with a property tax cap, with, the tightness of assessed valuation and growth patterns and new development, you have the, impacts of, higher ed and, certainly nonprofits and taxability, of course. So what are the long-term budget financial stability strategies? That was identified as an organizational need. Collaboration with the county, with, state and not-for-profit partners with higher ed. Also collaboration within the walls of city government. That came out, I think, in some of the department director surveys particularly, where, talking together, knowing what's going on, maybe a little bit more of a cadence on get-togethers or collaboration or communication. Also communication internal to the walls, both what can the city and the departments and the city manager do and the council do to communicate just from within, and who's within that's charged with communicating externally to the public. So it's a little bit of both of that. I feel that there's a feeling that accountability can be, not improved. To say that it's lacking, I don't think there was that, but accountability from the perspective of the city manager is expected to bring in a level of accountability as that top operational official that's sort of in the know. A highlight of a good city manager is a generalist. So they know a little bit about a lot of things, and they know a lot about many things, but they really have to have that pulse on the public works, and there's a project and it's a capital project and it was funded and here's why it was funded. Council is going to consider this initiative because it's timely and there's this grant going on and the regional council is upon us and we need to identify our needs for purposes associated with our grant endeavors. And the police reform plan indicated a series of moves to take place at this point in time. Why hasn't it taken place? Let's make sure it takes, that accountability measure. It's not to suggest, and I'm certainly not suggesting that council is not doing that, but there's an expectation that the charges of council to carry forward things are resting on the shoulders of the city manager to go ahead and do that. That's why it's there. And that's a clear and totally understandable expectation. And then strategic planning, that came up a few times as far as an organizational need, where does the city want to go moving forward? A little bit like we touched on in this, sort of almost accidentally, I guess you could say, or organically we touched on it, but really that's more of a robust process that's specific to the organization and the strategic plan. But that was talked about a little bit there too. Anything on that before we go to challenges and opportunities? Yeah.
So a few years ago, the city did called a climate survey. Basically got a read on the pulse of staff and how they're feeling. And this accountability thing did come up I think in the context of Shelley, can correct me if I'm wrong, but in the context of people not pulling their weight and there being no consequences for it. And I'm curious if you saw that as part of the accountability.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I did. A smattering of times. I wouldn't say it was an overwhelming volume, but certainly more than a couple. Yeah.
My question is, I don't know how to to how many people and who answered this survey? Could you give me?
Yeah. Yeah, there was 7 council member responses and 14 senior staff responses.
Okay, so this wasn't a survey for community yet?
Correct, it was tasked of me to develop it specifically for senior staff department directors and then city council
Okay,
typically.
thank you. Mhm.
Or you can go actually on to the next one. I think this is one of those ones that's on, it's action on click, so you can click off, you can click through. So you can just keep clicking through.
I
So
can jump in for
Yep.
one moment. This is in response to questions that were just asked. Ian will also be giving a presentation to senior staff. Council was asked to submit to the needs assessment, senior staff asked to submit to the needs assessment. So there will be a presentation to senior staff as well. We definitely want to engage and involve senior staff.
And will community be, because I think I heard external and internal, will community get an opportunity to weigh in on some of this? Or is that dependent on us as bringing back, or we already did the survey, so. No, I'm just asking that
Yeah,
one question, is community?
that's entirely up to the council.
Okay,
It's been done both ways. Sometimes the council says that through us and our
Yeah.
outreach and our purposeful outreach, not just, well, somebody comes to my door and says, I write the city man, maybe doing a little bit more proactive outreach.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's that, sometimes it's just like we're doing now, and sometimes it's some sort of forums and a survey, an email thing, a website thing, and sometimes it's actually a whole lot of nothing. So it does, that there is a spectrum of what the city or county chooses to do in terms of direct extraction of community interest or community commentary.
or we take, because y'all keep mentioning that 73% that was excited about this, but they never put in, okay, what they was excited about, right? You know, because did they even know what they, anyway, let me leave that alone. But yes,
So
so,
I think, to Phoebe's point and point, I think others may share, these meetings, the committee of the whole, these are special working meetings of
Yeah,
council.
okay.
We don't have, public comment. However, we do hope members of the public are either viewing in tonight or will look at the recordings. So that, can be incumbent upon all of us to share these recordings, to discuss with our constituents, and then as we move through the process, once we get to looking at positions and candidates, then we can also invite members of.
So these are some examples of what came out as far as challenges and opportunities. So sometimes these are positive, so I'll take staff as ambassadors. That was referenced, I think, in both sets of surveys as, staff are our best ambassadors. We've got some great staff. If they're out there in the field, talking about working for the city, they can be some of your best recruiters, and they can also be some of your best representatives of what I call government, good government, government done well, public service at its finest, out there in the community, serving the public and having that sort of mission orientation. So that was sort of an opportunity, how can we build upon that? Well, they didn't say this in the response, but that's where I go with those things. Like, how can you build upon that? How can you refine that, perfect that in terms of, a strategy? Intergovernmental relations, higher ed partnerships, certainly both identified as challenges and opportunities. Some of these are kind of bland sounding, like housing. What does it mean? I think really the council is going to know what that means. The council knows where you want to go with housing. You get into more internal within the walls and some of these. So, for example, technology, the present status of technological systems in the city, and how good are they? Strategies for internal operations. Is there a sense that there's a strategy there that has come up quite a bit? So I would sense, if I was going to try to grab some themes out of this, the overall strategic direction from an operational perspective of all these departments working together, it seems that at least some of them are coming up with that as a comment. Potentially looking at policies and procedures, that's a common thing that a manager might do, certainly with talking with council. Hey, how are we with this policy or this procedure? Are there bumps in this? Are we too bureaucratic here? Is there too much red tape here? Permitting, applying for a job, the budget process, those are common things that you would be maybe looking for a city manager to certainly minimally impart some commentary, but work with council on where would you like to be on some of those policies. Intergovernmental relations. Again, you have heard me harp on this, public information and communication, but also compensation and benefits. There was some talk about that. You could see from some of the staff, as far as you mentioned a compensation study, that's being done. So I think there's a thought that, labor relations and compensation and benefits and what could be some improvements there. A city manager will likely, a profile of a city manager, they will likely have some good solid experience in labor relations. They will likely have been the chief negotiator for the municipality that they're leaving or wherever they're coming from, that they'll likely have some sort of collective bargaining experience. You're going to want to see what their successes were in regards to that. And then cooperation and collaboration came out in this as well. Any questions on these?
DEI efforts, what is that?
Yeah, so that was some commentaries from both part of the survey. So what is the city doing to effectuate their ideals relative to diversity, equity, inclusion? Probably with staff is what the gist I got out of that. So staff or also as an organization. So what messaging are you putting forward with respect to your emphasis on that as a city?
And mine was hoping that the city manager is very understandable
Sure.
about DEI.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Okay, so now we actually get to the key competencies and characteristics of a city manager. You can go to the next one too. Yeah. So what do we want? Of course, we as the folks that participate in this, and this is also a good opportunity for, even if you did participate in that, to share other comments, because this really informs the process. You can click through all, this is one of those click through, so sorry about that. So when I've done these before, like somebody one time said, like, wouldn't everybody want, wouldn't everybody want a city manager that has most of these things? And the answer is generally, usually yes, but you just to make a point of this, just to remember that this is the responses and the results from the people who are in the know, who work for the council or our council, work for the city or our department director, leader, representative of those staff. And they're basically saying, like, we know, back to my point of that, it seems to be that there's a lot of support for this and not a lot of naysaying. That's fantastic. So you have that as your base level. And then your next level is these individuals, both council and staff, saying, well, what do we want when we talk about wanting a city manager? I mean, it's the operational stuff and the outcome stuff, and yeah, we want budget, but what else? And this is really that what else question, or what specifically question. So listening came up a lot. You've heard me talk about accountability, came up a lot. I think to your point, Phoebe, someone who has the ability to see operationally, budgetary, with management through a lens of equity and decision-making process. Mission-driven kind of servant leadership, that kind of goes into your intrinsic, motivational factors of why you're in the business, period. Pragmatic, patient is, of course, like, things take time, and you don't want to be that kind of, bull in a china shop or too fast, too quick. I think actually it speaks to the city itself that when it passed, we've taken a very methodical approach to arriving at this. So I think that is very important. And I think that will prove very beneficial when you get to the point of actually putting out a search, that you've done all that work, that you've been patient. You're gonna have a lot of these data sets, these points, these exchanges with council, the candid commentary, the meeting I'm gonna have with the staff, the inputs we've already got from the staff. So you've done a really good kind of taking a holistic approach and a slow roll to it, but in a good way. There's probably a couple more on there. So there's the strategic planning, thinking, communication.
Yes.
Yeah, transparency. So no, it's okay. So transparency from where are we going with city, affairs? Where are we going with city operations? But also to the public. I think people that answered that question that commented on transparency were coming at that from an angle of both internal and external. Personally, I'm like a huge proponent of that, so I think anything and everything you can do with respect to information sharing and public information and open forums and things like that is all the better for the city. Someone that can inspire, an inclusive person, open-minded, but just a couple things here. Listening, collaboration, accountability were probably the largest shining themes in some of the responses. Yep.
One thing that I really appreciated you saying is that you're non-political. And how do you, when you're interviewing people for this role, test for that, ensure that they will have the integrity and remain non-political? When you're operating in obviously a very politicized environment.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd like to clarify one element of my commentary on that. One is that you can't be naive to the politics that exists, period, in government, in life, in the world. So that there's a political, you often see they should be nonpartisan and apolitical, but politically savvy. That just means that, you know, they know that there's interactions with the council going on some issue. They know that somebody's in the community vying for some project that the council may be engaged in to try to talk for and advocate, rightly so, for, you know, for good reasons. So it's that. So I think the way you get to that question directly for the individuals is twofold. One is you ask the question, if they're an ICMA member, they adhere to a code of ethics. The code of ethics speaks directly to it, and if they say they adhere to it, you can ask them point blank the question. Of course, people can say, yes, I do, and not comply with it. But that's an easy one. So you say, are you an IC member? Yes. Okay. Do you adhere to the code of ethics? Or what does the code of ethics mean to you? And if they're, you know, good city manager, they're going to comment on that. I mean, I'm going to say it's on my wall at work. I'm going to say I put it into effect. I'm going to say those type of things. You should expect people that are ICMA members to say that. Not everybody is an ICMA member. So you would probably say, you know, for example, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you know, we chartered this position and structured this position such that our expectation is that they will be a nonpartisan practitioner of local government management, and they will be apolitical and stay out of the fray with respect to, you know, all things politics. Are you comfortable in that position if that's our expectation? I think that's a fair question. I don't think you're dancing around any inappropriate questions, because there are inappropriate questions. I don't think you'd be okay there. That makes sense.
That's great.
Yeah. Okay, so then, just have a couple more things and then we'll have, you know, an opportunity for the final comments and Q&A. So the key competency, so there was a exhaustive, so it was pretty inclusive, but it didn't of course have every single element of a potential competency list of 20+ factors, where skill sets and characteristics and competencies, and then you were asked to rank them, and as was the staff, in both sets of surveys. Organizational effectiveness and budget and financial, you know, capabilities were the top two. That does not surprise me. Those are the top two task-oriented job tasks of a city manager, really. And then strongly, you know, leadership, and then sort of a blending. So there was a little bit of a drop off after that. But then there was kind of a hodgepodge of different percentages based on the responses, but employee relations, recruitment and retention, management of people. So that's like human resources. So all things related to people, I kind of bucketed there in that fourth bullet, because that, you know, there was a lot of little ones that all were kind of in the realm of human resources management, people management. And then communications was also another one, which doesn't surprise me, because that obviously was a theme throughout different things: needs, challenges, opportunities, what we want for strengths. The word communication comes up for all of those things. And then strategic planning and performance measurement. So those were kind of distant, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, or eighth, but I blocked them together. The key point and takeaway for me for this slide was that, sort of rightly so, or expectedly so, that those were the top two areas of focus. Yeah.
Kind of just a follow-up to the political office question.
Sure, yeah, no problem.
If you go back a slide to I mean, it seems like budget and financial acumen are key factors here.
Yeah.
In distinguishing the position and having that capability. How do we assess what the fiduciary responsibility is of a chief executive of this stature? When you're operating in a politicized environment and things that perhaps the council are considering could break the budget. I mean, that would be a moment where presumably this officer has to come forth with all the financial data that they have and preside over and offer a responsible understanding of that information and be advisory to the other political players in the environment.
Yeah, it's a very good question. If a manager is tasked with producing some documentation or some reports or some analyses around a matter that council wants to advance, and that city manager will do that. So they will produce it, and they likely will have some alternatives. They will likely have some commentary, because they're probably being asked for some sort of advisory capacity. But I think I don't see that as, so the political players are those that are elected through a political process. They may want to advance an initiative that I guess what you're maybe leans political, maybe doesn't lean political. To me, it need not matter. The city manager is tasked with coming up with an analysis of it. If analysis says that for some reason, I want to do this capital project on this road, but the state funding is not there, it'll have to all come from a fund balance and, cover your ears, Steve, from projects that have negative equity or something like that. I mean, they would have to produce this thing that would say, I don't believe at this present time we have the ability to fund it. Or if they do, if there's a project or initiative that says, except that, potentially where, there was a couple comments in this from either staff or whatever about different initiatives around, I believe, electrification and green initiatives and climate goals and things of that nature. And it would just simply be whatever the city proper itself as a service provider is wanting to be involved with, whether it's an initiative, a project, a program, a public works project, a capital plan. Producing that budget should be, first of all, it should be easy for a good city manager. But if the results show a problematic financial situation, it's just up to them to just display that honestly and transparently with the council and have a dialogue about it. If I'm getting the question correctly.
I guess my concern is that a hard no to a reform package or aspirational expense for the city based on the financial data, which would be the responsibility of the city manager to deliver. I guess you kind of need to condition the community to understand that that's not a political gesture. That is just dollars and cents speaking facts.
Definitely political gesture. Well, I reject the premise of your statement, right? That's absolutely a political gesture.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but I think that's a good point. That's something that we would hash out.
Yeah, I think we have to be reminded that a city manager will come to council with information. Council will be managing and overseeing the city manager. City manager will be presenting in a nonpartisan fashion information, and council, the electeds, will make the decisions, which I think is what it is. But I don't know if it brings to something different. Dustin.
On the topic of the website, one thing I have, one thing concerned, but something I do want us to focus on is we have all these competencies. I know you're focused on like identifying the right person and hiring them, but I really having served on a few boards of directors where we had to unfortunately dismiss the executive director. And I don't always feel like, I felt like the decision to do so was the right one, but we didn't have, frankly, the documentation that I would have liked. And I'm just curious in your personal experience and the other municipalities that you've seen, what the annual review process looks like and what that accountability process looks like.
Yep. So there would be an expectation that really it's a firm one in my history with these things. I've seen some files that I know council's been working on. Essentially, you've got a must-have with a performance appraisal process, must-have, you know, it should be clearly articulated in the set of parameters that the city manager works under and within. They differ though, I mean, it depends on what council's preferences are, but usually it's, you know, some sort of council, you know, scoring or agreed upon instrument of some sort that speaks to a self-assessment, council assessment. You've seen them go into 360s where the department directors might be asked to opine on the performance as well, but minimally, and I would say the base level or the customary majority ones that you see out there are council, you know, minimally annually. Sometimes when they get started, it might be a touch earlier than that. And that's the documentation that would be the point, or that would be the point in the process of the relationship where certainly you're gonna have some informal stuff, you know, like meetings with the council or the mayor. Then that's the formal stuff. And if you actually got to a relationship that was soured, performance was a factor, whatever a fit wasn't there, the mechanism does exist for you to remove the person from the position. That would be the process, and that would be, you know, it would speak to the employment agreement and, you know, what provisions and what process would have to, you know, flow through and be carried out for that to happen. But, and managers know that it's really, yes, there's probably a term of office in many managers and administrators. I have a 4-year term of office. I know they can get rid of me, you know, if they wanted to through a process. There's an at-will nature of a city manager position that will, everyone that is in the profession sort of knows that going in. Does that answer your question?
I'm curious what it's like at Livingston County.
Yeah, so ours is a one time a year. It's the board leadership that they're charged with. So it's 5 individuals. I have a 17 member board. So I would say I got 17 bosses, 1 at home, 18 total. So there's 17 of them, and they defer in the local law that governs our process. They defer the leadership team of the board, and it's 5 individuals. They're charged with talking to all the other board members, gaining inputs, and then there's what I would kind of say a traditional performance appraisal document that is reviewed on various categories, and then they submit that to me, and that serves as a basis for my performance appraisal. And those are all documented, you know, on file, and then, you know, say those weren't going well, they would likely be, and I'm not going there, but if those weren't going well, they would be likely pointing to them to say, you know, hey, look, it's time for a change and things aren't working out too well here.
Thanks. So I'm a huge proponent of those ideas, and I think that's going to be very important for us to make sure we have a good, solid process in place. I'm also a strong believer in, you know, doing the hard work up front helps lessen the problems that we might encounter later on. So in that regard, and maybe this is upcoming in your presentation, or maybe it's for the mayor or whoever is Shelley, but what are you doing with us? In other words, what's your involvement with this? Are you going to help us in assisting the search, deliver, say, finalists to go through interviews? I don't even know if that's the thing we're going to do. And then you're done, and we go through the rest of the process, or will you be there to help us, say, craft how those interviews should go to help us really assess whether a candidate has the kind of competencies that we're expecting out of them?
Yeah, good question. So for the purpose of the phase 1, it's more of a profile, competencies, characteristics. Phase 2, so I think what you're referring to is more of a full, robust, comprehensive, traditional executive search, you know, a national executive search where you're sourcing candidates, talking to people. That is then constructed however the council would want it to be constructed. So for example, where do things like just granular level things, where do the applications go? At what point in time is the council engaged to review those? Moment 1, to score them, assess them, more so later on in the process. It differs by party, by council, by county. So those would be the type of questions, but certainly in a phase 2 full search, I would find myself involved with those type of things, you know, crafting interview questions, doing assessments, sometimes doing screening on behalf of council, and sometimes folks prefer that and sometimes they don't. So that would be that intuitive process to figure out, iterative process to figure out what you want. And then it would be questions, fit, interview, scenario development, things like that, coordination of all that. That would be in the phase 2 part of the search. And actually, I think that's in some ways coming up in the next slide. Yeah, a little bit. So, yeah, no, I touch on it, but, so you were right. Position profile, job description. So, a city manager search of where you are in the process, there's basically kind of 3 things that end up being kind of produced as an actual product. Especially when you are just creating one from scratch, which you are. Civil service has a formal job description. So that is Shelley's purview. She's working on that, it's being updated. So that is a civil service job description. So somebody who is applying for the position would have to meet some base level requirements. Yeah.
Very timely. Shelley and staff has certainly been working on that, and there was a draft that was just circulated, to council a few hours ago. The civil service. So you have read our mind, and I think this has been discussed in the conversations. I should say that Shelley and I have had a few meetings, Zoom meetings, with Ian, which have been very productive, and we have shared some of this. We looked at, we discussed the needs assessment. So Ian has been doing some work with us already to set this up. I really appreciated, we just jump in here and editorialize and say, I appreciate your comment that we are taking a very methodical and thorough process at heart. Going forward, I understand concern. We have a city manager role that begins January 2024. We want to both make haste, but also be very deliberate with such complex change to our city government. So the fact that you described it as, methodical and thorough process that we're undergoing is heartening to me, because that has been our intent. We want this to be successful. We want the first city manager coming in to be successful, and we want council to be successful in this endeavor, this relationship with the first city manager. So we're moving ahead. Very methodical.
And it actually speaks to, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just this methodical, I can't say words, we still trying to get a city, chief of police, right? And so, and I'm looking at, this is not June anymore, July, August, September, October, November, December, and we need somebody for January 1st, right? So, I'm a little concerned.
Okay, I can speak to that, and I actually was gonna make
And
one.
are you getting paid for this work that you do?
Yeah.
I will jump in to confirm that we are, in fact, we have a contract for phase 1, and there will be a contract coming to council for phase 2 of Ian's work. So tonight was to talk about where we are right now, the deliverables of phase 1, and then as we move into phase 2. And I'm right there with you, Phoebe. We have a number of key positions, retirements in the city, and the months are going by faster than any of us might like, but that is the case. So we have to be methodical and trying to think of what word to use. No errors and not lose our scheme, not lose haste as we move forward. Thank you.
And just one point I was gonna make on some of the discussion that started that track was the approach of doing a phase 1 of the lay of the land and a competencies and involving folks as you've done it early on in the process. helps. It's not, it's not always 1,000%, but it helps the likelihood for success moving forward. I think was Rob's point that, some of this preliminary work is like uber important. So places have not done all this and just started the ball rolling, put it that way. So I think it's very important that you chose to go this route. That's what I'm saying. So just quickly on this, I mentioned the civil service job description. The position profile is the phase 1 deliverable, in part taking a draft of some documentation that I've started to put together, taking the feedback received today and then next week. That includes, additional details on the job specifically, but also the challenges. And then really what the ideal candidate profile starts to look like based on all the commentary and the feedback from all of you and from the staff. So really that's where the council comments on the profile, competencies, key characteristics, the things that I'm taking notes on here, the things that I've already received, anything that will be forthcoming shortly after this meeting that becomes a poof, thought from you on the way home, certainly, of course, send my way. And then to wrap up, I have one last one for final comments. So you might have to move me maybe in the corner for that one. I'm not, yeah, sorry, yeah. So final comments. As I said, the only thing I'm nonpartisan on is I'm partisan on the fact that I really believe strongly in a professional city manager position. So I'm openly subjective on that one. But I do believe strongly in it. I've spoken to many councils about it. I didn't speak to the city council in Ithaca about it, but I followed it from the outside very closely. And it was sort of rooting for the change because I do believe in it. And this is coming from someone who spoke at 3 Buffalo City Common Council meetings to like empty chambers, and knowing that was a quixotic effort at best. That was never going to happen, but I tried and I spoke to the benefits of the city council of Buffalo. But I mentioned the composer-conductor relationship. I think that's something to keep top of mind as you roll this process out. I think it should shine to you that communication was interwoven in the challenges and in the opportunities and in the successes and in the things to shoot for, and then what we want in the city manager and what we want council manager communication comes up a lot. So I just keep that top of mind. No silver bullets. That's sort of how I started, which is it's a cog in a wheel. It's an individual actor in the greater public service delivery mechanism that is city government in Ithaca. It's a super important position. It's worthwhile. It's meaningful. It's valuable. That's why you endeavored to pursue it, and that's why you got the votes, and that's why you got it done. And that's why so many places have done what you did nationally. But it's just one person. So I think the supports need to be there from the council, the direction, the strategy, just even down to the level of, filling staff positions or they're deciding what's going on with certain staff positions. I mean, that's really important for the success of what ends up being the success of the city manager. So kind of into that point, it takes a community. The city can't resolve all issues that are on your plate. But you can work towards, perfections to imperfect situations, refinements to things that need refining, and that's your role as a council. And I think that having a good, competent, professional COO, CAO, CEO to take you to that level. Like I said to your question, Jeffrey, your comment. This would be a wonderful opportunity for a really good city manager. It's there for the taking, honestly, for a great successful partnership, in my opinion. I'll end with a joke that there is a joke in the profession that you want to be the second city manager in a community. Sorry. So this comes from someone who was the very first village manager in the village of Brockport. So I actually come from experience. I was the very first chief administrative officer for a village government, okay, but it was a town gown village government at 8,000 people, very small, but village of Brockport, I was hired as a treasurer, finance person. And they said, look, it was too much, even that small village, complexities and we had a police department, there was some concerns, sounds familiar, public works challenges, planning challenges, communication challenges, and they created the position of village manager and named me the position of village manager. So I personally have experience being the first person, so I can kind of, impart on some, lessons learned and things like that. So, but I joke around about that. I still think you'll be successful in finding that person, but, it's always that nuanced difference between a long established track record, because you're going into this new too. You also have council changes looming from, okay, so you're going into all this new as well. So, it's just important to, I guess I'll say my last word, just recognize and appreciate that, that nuance, that's a new position that they're walking into as well. It's new to you, and really just, how do you make it work? You told the public you want to make it work, so that's your charge. Make it work. So
Thanks,
that's all I
Ian.
got.
Great presentation.
And I want to do a soft landing at 7:30, so I want to be ready.
Thanks, Laura, and thank you very much. I don't know who can answer this question, but I'm concerned about time. And I'd like to know how soon we can get phase 2 moving.
So I could talk a little bit, I'm sure others can answer the council movement question, but I can talk a little bit to the process. The stretch of time in a search, to your point, is not, an overnight thing, but I still think you're okay for time for starting January 2024. So I always look in the back end, if that's when you want to have the person start, they're likely coming from a place where they have to provide a requisite amount of notice. So you're talking, it's not a 2-week thing either, so it's likely 30 days or something like that.
Find a place to live.
At least, yeah, at least. Now that piece, I'm not sure of, because I think you're gonna want to discuss. So say you do hire someone for a start date in January, but the timing is such that they're out of the area or whatever. I mean, they're gonna have to set up shop somewhere first, with an understanding that whatever the residency policy will be to speak of, that they, have to establish residency, whatever that says, right? But working backwards, they would have to notify their employer if they're coming from someplace else to have a 30-day window. So you're in, December 1 or something like that for the decision to make the announcement as your last time frame. So working backwards from there, when would you have been interviewing, right? So you would have been interviewing in November, right? You would have been interviewing November. It's a little tight for holidays and things like that.
Yeah, I think we need wiggle.
No, exactly. So I'm just kind of working backwards on the worst case, last case scenario. So I think if you were to start at the front, it's probably a 30-day window of application period. That's common. It doesn't have to be, it can be longer, it can be shorter. But the moment you put an ad out, it's usually about 30 days or so is common. So you have a first review of applications 30 days from whenever you post the position. It goes to a variety of different places. People see it, and as an executive search consultant, that's some of the meat of the work is done at that point in time to try to hurry, to have interest in the position, talk to people, networks, connections, associations, meetings, visits. A lot of times people nowadays are not looking for a position or potentially, so you need to go find them and introduce them to the opportunity that is the Ithaca City Manager job. So that would all be done at that point in time. And then, then you're looking at, and again, that speaks to my question earlier, what do you desire that to be? Is it a search committee of the council? Is it the entirety of the council? Is the council reviewing every single resume as it comes in? Is that provided to the search consultant to handle that and kind of give you an ABC ranking, and you're welcome to do the B's and the C's if you see something I don't see, but here's my professional recommendation. Often will look like that. And then you're doing interview scheduling, things like that. So yeah, I mean, the timing's tight, it's there, but it's totally doable is I guess what I'm trying to say.
I appreciate that, and that clarifies it to a degree, but I'd like to know realistically how soon we can get the position posted so that people can apply.
Sure.
Jill, do you want to join us at the table also? Yeah, George, and others, you're certainly asking good questions. Jeffrey has raised this in the past. We definitely want to be moving this along. This is not the first start in the process, but there have been steps taken, the civil service description, pulling from a lot of different sources. There was the 2021 draft position description, but finalizing the position profile and the actual position description is something that we need to be doing quite soon.
And so, I'm sorry, no, I just have one question before you pack up.
I'm not going anywhere else. I'll just move my stuff out.
No, I have two quick ones, cause I'm new. I wanna know what ICMA means, what it stands for, because I'm not yet.
You know, understood, yeah, and I speak too much in acronyms anyways, so I apologize. So, a city or county manager in the profession likely will be a member of a professional association of city and county managers. There's about 10,000 members. It's called ICMA, International City County Management Association. They also do the credentialing program, which is sort of like a certification program for managers. And, you know, all the professional development, training, networking, conferences, education materials, books, publications, all of those type of things, webinars,
International.
city/county, yeah, city / management association, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna look it up,
Yeah.
so you don't have to go into detail. And one more question, do you know, when was the first city manager appointed in New York State? Or I can Google that too.
Oh, yeah, sure. So the profession had the first city manager, I believe, in 1914 in Sumter, South Carolina.
Okay,
There was in New York, my guess would be potentially the city of New Rochelle.
okay.
Would be my guess. The newest one was the city of Rye on downstate because they're the newest city. So, and they have a city manager, so. Yeah, I mean, Elmira's had a city manager for some time, Batavia, Corning, Geneva. So, but again, New York State is actually very rare. There's one point on that. New York State has municipalities galore, as you know. I mean, we lead the nation with Pennsylvania and Illinois in the numbers and types of local government entities, you know, villages, towns, special districts. And that comes from someone who's worked for all of them. I love them, right? But we have a ton of them. If you were in North Carolina, probably Ohio, Virginia, Texas, whatever, every, around here, Drive would have a town manager. The village of wherever would have a village administrator. So it just, New York's very rare that they do not have a very strong experience, I guess, in professional city and village town management, but other places it just proliferated and every single jurisdiction has a professional administrator. Like Texas, for example, 638 population town will have a town manager. Vermont, it's just odd, it's just the way it shook out. Probably a byproduct of New York historically has had a little bit more political tinge to it. But also it started kind of down in that area and sort of gradually went up there and didn't really hit New York and the volume that it hit these other places.
Thanks.
Can we answer the question I asked a while back?
Yeah, sure, George. So this is the plan. The Civil Service Commission is meeting the first week in July. So this will go to them, and what they do is they finalize the job description and classify it. At the same time, and at that point and at that time, and once we have dollars approved, we can start immediately.
So to get the dollars approved, it has to go to council.
It will come to council, yes.
So in July,
It'll come to council in July. It is going to CA. I'm actually drafting the resolution. I was drafting it earlier today. It'll be ready for CA this month.
thank you.
And did you want to add anything at this point?
Sure, yeah, so I think now's probably a good time to also share in terms of timeline going forward that, I know, I believe council will have a July 12 committee of the whole intended for further discussion around some topics related to the city manager transition. And that our objective and recommendation is that one of the topics on that July 12 agenda be a review of a draft contract for a city manager. And an accompanying set of code or charter, like charter provisions to support that context. which obviously, you know, by the time we get to the point of actually hiring somebody, we're gonna want a contract ready that we propose to them, but absolutely not something we want to be sorting through at the staff and council level by the time we have the candidate identified. So we want to discuss that with you on July 12th. And go from there.
Thank you for that. So at what point would we be able to expect seeing a draft contract?
Certainly by no later than the agenda that will be for that meeting. So again, the contract doesn't need to be finalized in order to post the position. I just want to make sure that's clear. These are parallel tracks that I would describe them as. One track is identifying candidates, posting, identifying candidates, and the other will be developing an employment contract. Obviously, those parallel tracks will eventually have to meet with a particular candidate who signs a particular employment contract. But I do want to be clear that the employment contract is not a prerequisite in my mind anyway. I'm interested in Ian or Shelley or others see it differently, but I don't believe the employment contract is a prerequisite to posting the position and starting that search.
Agreed with all of that. I was approaching it more from the perspective of, I think it's well and good for us to discuss this at that meeting. My concern is, if that's our first time discussing it, there are important things in there, like the term, like, Ian, you said yours is a 4-year contract, you broke into that, 2 to 5, like, that may necessitate more than one meeting before that contract is completed.
Sure, yeah, I mean, obviously that can, that's something that the council and the mayor can decide as we discuss it.
Well, sorry, can I just opine on that? I think it would be, again, I don't want to overstep my bounds here, but to me, that would probably be more of a consensus meeting in the minds. Because as I explained to Ari, I mean, at least my vantage point, when you have somebody come in, it's almost like, are people generally cool with this as the parameters of what of a contractual agreement with your forthcoming city manager would look like? Because in my experience, everybody that's coming in is going to understand the general parameters, but they're going to have a little nuanced differences to what they might expect to get. Like, I just think of things like vacation and things like, obviously what the pay is, but like, vacation, what the severance provision speaks to or what is like, a few other things that, maybe performance appraisal, maybe they just want to just make sure they're, they're good with that, that they may sort of want to personalize. So I just, meaning like, I've never seen the council approve a city manager contract prior to having a city manager candidate ready to roll. I think you would have a general consensus framework. You kind of want it to look like this, but if I'm a city manager candidate, I'm going to say, okay, if I'm your person, okay, let's negotiate. Now, generally, as I said, 99% of that's probably boilerplate, because there is a model, back to your ICMA question, there's actually a model ICMA employment agreement out there for that reason, because somebody doesn't want to reinvent the wheel. Right. So you don't want to reinvent the wheel, but there might be a couple of particulars on there that they're desirable of, or desirous of, I should say.
And so Ian, your point being that you don't think that we have to have written in stone every last provision.
I like your comment of like parallel tracks.
Yeah.
And kind of having it going, but certainly you don't want anything to be earth-shatteringly difficult for the council to stomach. And then all of a sudden have a candidate ready to roll and be like, we're back to that thing that we didn't agree on. I mean, you sort of want a general parameters of approval, but just understanding that somebody may be coming from a position where they have X amount of weeks of vacation, not the biggest deal in the world. I'm just saying there's very small nuanced things is all.
Yeah, and understood and agreed. I do want to emphasize for council that what we bring you for that July 12th meeting will not be general parameters. It will be nuts and bolts, every last word of employment contract. And then those can be reviewed, discussed, and then flexed as we all, in the end, conclude is useful in negotiations for a particular candidate that one where that's possible.
But again, to reiterate that, we'll be going on a parallel track with, that will not be holding up our search, initiating the search. Vivian and Cynthia?
No, I just heard the notes of nuts and bolts. Would that be from us that we together have?
So that July 12th agenda
Yeah.
will contain an actual employment contract.
Okay.
With all the words in it.
Yeah.
And then council will have a chance to review that and weigh in
Okay.
on what various particular provisions in that contract.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I know a draft job description was released or is there today. It's gonna go to CA this month. So if there's any recommended edits or modifications, will that happen at CA before it goes to civil service in July?
So you should provide, I gave you a date, sorry. To provide the information that'll go back to civil service, to my department, and incorporate the changes that you have expressed. As long as they are consistent with civil service.
So I'm sorry, so it needs to then be consistent with civil service, any changes before it goes to CA, is that what you're saying?
We don't typically bring job descriptions to council to vote. What we bring to council is the resolution to create and assign. So I'm just, so next week is CA. There will be okay, so I got one resolution. There will be a resolution to create, and it'll be contingent upon, you may not have the final version until before council, just because we're trying to do this, to your question, George, and get things started. So there's some things typically that there's sort of this linear way of doing it. We don't have the time to do a linear, so we're doing things simultaneously.
Also, I think that you do have a little more time because CA is 2 weeks from now, right?
CA's on the 28th.
Yeah,
So
so,
I'll give y'all a good time.
right, CA is on 28.
So I just saw the email, you wanted comments by the 20th.
Right.
And so there should be somewhat of a fully drafted job description. And then at CA, there'll be a resolution to create the position. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct.
Okay. So thank you, just fully understanding where we go from here. Then the second question I have, and this is a parallel conversation, but also somewhat associated. So council did indicate its desire to create a deputy city manager position with explicit oversight over law enforcement, as well as coordinating the police department with other departments in the city, as well as other municipalities. Obviously, this is something that we are also eager to get underway, but I'm going to fully recognize that anybody that serves as deputy to a city manager is going to want to say in that process as well. There was a draft job description. There were some comments made to the draft job description. As far as I know, I'm not quite sure where it sits now. Do we have any idea of where that process is? Obviously, I think that's something we also want to pay some very close attention to before that gets finalized through civil service.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I don't think the deputy city manager is going to civil service. We have the desire to move forward with the city manager. So yes, council has clearly expressed the interest in the deputy city manager, but it's challenging to build out a full position description of that while we are right now working on the city manager.
I understand. I'm just trying to get a sense of anticipating what that timeline might be. Do we have, and I understand, like I said, any manager hired is going to want a lead role in deciding and choosing their deputy city manager. So I'm just trying to get a sense of us thinking about where we are in that process, because we are very eager to see this element go into place as part of our reform.
Yeah, I don't, this is what I don't know anything about, so I'm not in a position of, except for, I would agree with you that when I see a city manager posting of another community nationally at the same time of a deputy city manager posting, I always think it's a little odd. So I think it's where the point you make, I think is fair and well taken. I would agree with it. Because I think that city manager should have a little bit more of a personalized role in the selection process for their deputy, but that's about all I can say on that one.
Okay, is there confirmation that that job description has not been fully set yet? Or I just don't want to miss when that job description is finalized and have it miss that window of opportunity to provide input on it.
You're talking about the deputy.
Yes,
It is not fully set.
okay. And that will presumably come back to council for an opportunity to provide input on that.
Well, to Shelley's point, I don't think council usually has a role in deputy.
Right, but this is a very explicit role that was created at the direction of council
I understand.
to oversee law enforcement. And so this is very unique in that way, and I think members of council are very interested in how this job description is designed.
Understood. The focus right now, and the council knows very well that there are a number of key searches going on simultaneously because council members are involved in serving on some of those department head searches. So there are a lot of balls in the air and changes and initiatives going on at the moment. So it is not as though the deputy city manager is not on the radar, but the primary focus is the city manager. Okay. All right.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very informative and I really do appreciate it. I do have two questions. I'll provide one right now and then I will, come back to the second one after some more folks have time to speak. In regards to qualifications and, specific experience, with the city manager, we're taking a much more administrative managerial approach to the type of qualifications that we're looking for as they're going to be handling the nuts and bolts, the aspects of the executive administration, essentially, for the city. And I'm just curious if you could provide like types of, practical examples of prior professions or experiences that we as council should like strive to sort of look for in terms of specific applicants to sort of distinguish it from, qualifications that we might want from legislators or things of that regard.
Sure. So from straight qualifications, usually there's an education and an experience combo. Bachelor's plus a longer stretch of time, master's plus a shorter stretch of time. Stretch of time differs, but depending on where the civil service ends up. I've seen them as, masters in 5 to 7, bachelors in 5, 7, or 10, something like that. Again, the premise being that, the degree sort of counts for something in the experience quotient. On experience, certainly it's a pathway is common where I've managed, someone's managed a jurisdiction of a smaller size and is looking for that upward mobility. So that would be a city, town, village, or borough, parish, where they would be looking to get to a jurisdiction of a larger size. So they've been a CAO, COO, CEO type in a governmental unit. Could be a utility district. We've seen a few of those. Could be some sort of public services district. Really what I would be looking for is the generalist traits, the budgetary management, the leadership, the communication, intergovernmental relations, grant writing, potentially, or grant management, PIO work, public information officer work, all that type of stuff that is generally common in a chief administrative officer position. Working with a council, working with a board, all that sort of stuff. Carrying out strategy as it's been identified by a governing body. So that's probably like your home run hits or whatever are going to be those type of people that show up as a candidate. But I don't want to also say you're not going to find home run possibilities on other outlets. So there would be, again, I'd be looking for an individual who does similarly situated work, but in a jurisdiction or a organization that's not necessarily a public sector organization. So around here, I would think maybe a sizable nonprofit, but they got a board of directors, they're advancing the cause of whatever the nonprofit is. There's people management, there's budget management, there's external funding, there's public messaging, there's things like that. Those are transferable skill sets. They're in the realm of what I would say the public or social sector. Higher ed comes to mind. If there's I think of like positions like VPs of administration and finance, oftentimes CFOs, CAOs, intergovernmental relations officers. I see a lot of those. In fact, it's kind of funny. City managers often go there after the city management world. So you know that there's some transferability. You see it on the other end. A lot of city managers become VP of administration and finance in other places. Because you're sort of like a COO, you're running that organization in a roundabout way for the president and the board, perhaps. Short of that, so utility districts, public districts, cities and counties, again, counties, a good sized department director for a county government organization, a deputy county administrator, even a county administrator manager. You get into the private sector world, I think you probably find less transferability, but there's probably still some. I mean, if it's a, some sort of quasi-governmental entity, I think of like a local development corporation, like an IDA, a business development corporation. Some of these LDCs that were started in various places, potentially could be, you got a board of directors, it's governmental, you're walking in the same, fields, talking to the same people, sharing the same networks. State government, potentially, depending on the role, I think, you see some fits that people have done that route. Economic development agencies that are not in the mix of what I just talked about. Public works professionals. So back in the day, city managers came from usually public works, finance, or general operations, and then maybe human resources. So the department directors, subject matter experts in an area, and all of a sudden, I'm going to take the leap and become the overarching manager of the whole jurisdiction. So that's oftentimes where they might come from. So I hope that ends long-winded question. Long-winded answer. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Phoebe, did you have a question?
Yes, no, I had I pretty much have a comment. Earlier today, when I was realizing I had to come to this meeting, stuff like that, I started thinking about a lot of things. Here I go, y'all. But anything, this is a scary moment for the city. And also just hearing it is a scary moment for me. But as I sit here, I'm getting more and more excited, right? Because not only that there's so much change happening, right? And so this is a really exciting time for us. So thank you for all of what you brought. Thank you, Shelley. And just overall, I'm just feeling really excited. We may have a new bunch of 10 people, except me, I know I'm winning. But what I do know is that this is really, really an exciting time. Like this really is marking a history point. My name will be in there. But what I really am saying is we're losing a lot of staff that has been doing this for a long time. We're getting a lot of new individuals, city manager, deputy manager, all these different things. So, I mean, I'm kind of getting excited. I might get a little more nervous at home and I'll forehead. But anyway, that's just my little spiel. I think we have a time in history that might mean a really lot to the city of Ithaca.
Thank you, Phoebe. Ron.
Yeah, I think it's well said, and it reminded me of one of the things that we really sort of leaned on a little bit 2 years ago when we first started these conversations, was that there was this professional association that had a wealth of resources about how it could help us understand the value of moving to a model like this. And I'm appreciative of the question about, where are the places we could be looking for someone that would bring the right set of things to us. And so I'm also wondering how important that I guess certification, is it a certification that you get from your ICMA? How important is that to the role? And if someone brings these other transferable skills from a different environment, is it unusual to ask them to maybe go down that route or at least use the resources of an organization like this?
It's a good question. I would say that it's a touch of a separator, but it's not an end all be all. I know it's a little bit of a murky answer. I mean, I think all else being, if you could really equalize two people and one has gone down the road of attaining certification status and getting the credentialing, it speaks a touch more, I think, to their experience and education and professional development and probably where you're gonna find the fit. But it's also not an end all be all. I mean, I would certainly not dismiss somebody who hasn't done it, you know, because really it's experience based with a touch of not really an assessment, but a self-assessment, and it's a commitment to professional development, and it's a commitment to the profession. So it's something, you know, but I wouldn't go so far as to say I would say the small separator. I think if you have someone that comes into the position who's not involved with ICMA or is not a credential manager, I think that it would be a totally fair game, you know, conversation to say that, you know, say to council as we believe in the profession and we want you to develop professionally, and we would encourage you to seek out your credential status because we think it would be a benefit to the organization as well, which is really the, I mean, it should. If you develop professionally, you're a city manager, you're a representative of the city council, so you should be, you know, the city should really have that kind of intersection of a collaborative environment to support that. I think Jorge had two questions and he only asked one.
No, my last question is something that you sort of broached on earlier in the presentation regarding oversight and advisory. This is, I think, was one of the key sort of concerns that a lot of folks have regarding the city manager in regards to, like, you know, appointed by the council. And how do we sort of draw the lines between political activity, engagement versus, you know, administrative, taking this stuff on and following the direction of council and what have you. And of course, we know that there's the nuclear option essentially of, like, if you're not, you know, content with what the city manager is doing, we can replace that individual. But again, and you sort of touched on it with some ideas, and I appreciate that, but just more insights into how you could advise us and how we would handle navigating the situation of, you know, the city manager is going to come to us with advisory ideas for how we're going to handle sort of whether it's policies or just legislative agendas or initiatives. How do we sort of broach that in the best way possible, where we're sort of like appreciating, accepting that advisory and trying to make the best decisions based off of it. But you understand that balance there.
Yeah, I do. I think it's setting expectations. I think it's communication. I think it's regular meetings, whether it's a representative of council like the mayor or something like that, that's supposed to be taking some feedback in. So, for example, if someone's ever going to get terminated from employment as a city manager, it shouldn't come as a surprise. If they're going to be likewise, you know, recognized and lauded for some incredible effort, likewise, it shouldn't come as a surprise, because there should be this regular involvement, this regular interaction, this regular you know, style and format of meetings and exchanges. So I think that would be certainly the clear expectations that somebody comes in, they know the profession. They should know that there are times when you disagree with the movement afoot of what the council wants to do, like maybe on some policy position statement or something like that, or some endeavor that you think is really going to be a fiscal issue or something like that long term. You know, maybe potentially you know, a personnel decision that you support in one way that the council, look, you know, from a budgetary amendment perspective, you know, this is the crude expression, this is the way the mop flops, you know, and this is what you're gonna have to do, and you're gonna have to live with it, and you're gonna have to work around it. I think people should know that coming in, that's an expectation of the job. And you're really just navigating around that. I think you heard it here in the thing, communication. I mean, I'm not trying to be 101 it, but I mean, that's really what it's amounts to. Regular communication. So, hey, here's going well. I've heard stop, start, and what's the other one? You know, so here's what you should be started, here's what you should stop, and here's what you should, you know, recognize. You've seen that in some performance appraisal, but I think that would be a good idea for council, especially because this is a new position. You know, you want it to succeed. So how do you have success? They have to know what they're walking into. They have to know reading the room, they shouldn't have to sort of infer, like, you kind of looked at me, we were in the way in, are you cool, are we cool, can I not do something good? I mean, like, you really don't want that to happen, you want to have that open, dialogue and things like that, so.
It's true.
And I have I'm just thinking ahead along our timeline with our goal of having a city manager in place by January 1. And so I know I'm skipping some steps, but these are just a couple of questions that have come to me in thinking about that timeline. And one is maybe just helping me with some confidence. You mentioned earlier in the meeting that there's a certain sense of attractiveness of this role and our ability to find a really well qualified candidate. Joke aside, the fact that it's a new position might have some attraction, right? The fact that it's Ithaca has a reputation, positive, I think is what you were implying. But also the fact that any negative aspects can be seen as a professional challenge, and some people who are professionals in this field will kind of thrive on that. So I'm really hopeful that given the sort of national context of this professional organization that creates a lot of resources and connections and networks for people, that we really will be able to draw from a large national pool of people who would find this attractive and bring the qualifications that we're interested in. But I'm trying to get a sense of, prepare us, right? What should we be prepared for?
Yeah.
And, because you also noted that, since the great whatever, it's been a challenge to fill some of these roles. So I'd love to, get a sense of what that is, and also maybe a sense of, what is it about New York State? Is there something that attracts more or less, or should we be happy that we get people from New York, or more happier if we get them from other parts of the world?
I would say that, because back to my comment about the professional, the level and type and amount of professional management that exists in New York comparatively to other states is low. So therefore, in a candidate pool, you might not expect to have a ton of candidates from New York, even though you're in New York, because there's not a lot of deputy city managers and assistant city managers that want to take the lead, because there's just not that many cities and jurisdictions of that size that have that position. So I do think through ICMA, the National League of Cities, Public Service Careers, a group called ELGO, which is Engaging Local Government Leaders, NLC, even the National Association of Counties, the New York State Conference of Mayors, all of those outlets are where you want to get to find your prospective candidates. When I think of New York, I think, the pluses are New York experience, so the Taylor Law. I mean, so we know, local government, our labor relations, there's some really specificity with how we have to operate in New York, general municipal laws, things like that. You can learn it. People come from out of state and are wildly successful. So that's not, you don't get hamstrung because you're not, but you're up against people that might have already a ton of experience. It's old hat for them. They can walk right into that. They know the governor and they know the relationships, and they know the regional councils, and they know grants, and they know those type of nuances. I think that's a plus for somebody. It really is. All things being equal, New York State experience period is a plus. I think coming to New York from out of state, pitfalls, I guess you could say, there are some. I mean, the cost of living is a concern for people. Although the housing stock, even though it's been rising, is still likely lower than a lot of other places, because New York State as a whole traditionally has had lower housing stock prices, although of course have risen with assessed values and the growth patterns and things like that. Property taxes, I don't think really is going to be an impact for anybody. Whether, if they're coming to New York, they got to understand they're going to have, some other stuff. I think your attractive components are higher ed, the known name brand of Ithaca. I think people may be attracted to work in the community with kind of a different type of socioeconomic, maybe social justice lens. Let me say that, because not every place is going to be that type of mindset from a governance body than this place is. So that will be potentially attractive. To your point, the counterpoint, it could be a detraction for some people, right? So let's be honest, right? I think, you know, if they get into the weeds, I would want to have someone roll up their sleeves into the challenges, but I will say there's a counterpoint to that. Somebody might say, look, there's a little bit there I'd have to kind of get involved with, position hires and police reform implementation that they may not want to jump right into. But I think of places that are good sized cities that are progressive cities and towns and villages across really the nation. I think that would be your, if I'm like this and I'm going, that's a good candidate pool out there that I think would be attracted to a place like this myself. In addition to your New York people, in addition to your people that may be in Ithaca that are in those areas that you're talking about, that know the city, know the area, but aren't a city or deputy or county manager, but just want to work and serve the public, you're gonna have those people as well. But then you're also gonna have those people who have no business applying for the job of city manager in Ithaca. I mean, that happens every single time. That just, you know, the way it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask sort of what your personal approach is to recruiting. I'm a recruiter myself and I make phone calls all day long. So I'm curious, you know, is that gonna be, you're gonna post this job and then presumably we'll receive the applications, but you also mentioned that you want to put it in front of people, you want to make people who are in those candidate pools that you say, you know, sort of target as ideal to go after them directly. I see an opportunity there for the city officials to actually help out in that regard. You know, potentially the mayor can make a phone call, jump on a call with you. If you highlighted a list of people who would be ideal for this job and you just want them to consider it, a personal phone call could help us expedite getting viable candidates.
So just as far as approach goes, I haven't seen that done, but it's not to say it's a bad or good idea. I have seen a couple times where the chief elected would actually put out a little video about the opportunity. I've seen that a little bit lately in recruitment brochures and profiles, like where they're talking about the opportunity on behalf of what will be the employer. You know, that lead elected official representative will be the governing body that this person works for, and they kind of speak to, hey, here's the opportunity, you know, hey, introduce yourself, here's who I am, here's what you can expect, and we're a great council, we're working on these various things, do you want to be, we want you to be part of it. I think that kind of welcoming nature is new still, frankly. There's lots of old school stuff going on, but what I would be doing is certainly LinkedIn has become a go-to spot for people. I'm sure you know that. It's not the end all be all, but it's a go-to spot. All those associations have job boards, but they have more importantly boards of directors. They have executive directors. They have people in the know. New York State has an ICMA affiliate. I'm on the board, so I get to those people all the time, and I say, you know, here's the opportunity. I would be then scanning that and doing a more deep dive and thinking, okay, who might be a good fit. I happen to do a lot of involvement on the national circle, so I would go to places like Ohio and Colorado and North Carolina and Virginia, and in addition to New York, and I'd be seeking out leaders in those places and being like, hey, here's what you got here. You got a city, here's population, here's the dynamic, here's the profile. Do you know anybody, you know, that would do? And then I would probably be reaching out to some of those people myself and saying, you know, do you have any referrals, recommendations, or nominations? Or hopefully when we start doing this, I would start doing the screening, identifying people and saying, calling them up personally, like I'm sure you do, and say, hey, would you be interested in the position? Usually it's like, look, I've taken a look at your skill sets and, you know, you might be a good fit, right? Because you really don't want to say, you know, you're off and come, but you don't know yet. You know, you have a conversation and you kind of almost pre-vet them a little bit, encourage an application because that'll get the ball rolling, encourage an expression of interest, the resume. Hey, do some research, do a deep dive. It may not be a fit for you. You know, your family may be here, your spouse, partner, job may not be a good fit for you, but and then it's the regular postings. It's on the city website. It's on the workforce development board. It's on the New York State boards. It's on Indeed. You get a lot of not so hot stuff coming from Indeed. At least some of my bad experience. It's so easy to click and, you know, apply. So you want to be probably more curated about that, but that's generally what.
So should we put out a press release that we've eradicated winter in Ithaca?
Things like that messaging would be important.
Some people appreciate it.
So my other question though is, just how many candidates would you, want to garner here, before we really proceed with next steps, and what's your ideal number?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the, 2025 would be a good number. 10 to 15 might be, well, I mean, really, joke is it only takes one, you only need one. Now, again, that would be maybe idealistic given, where things are. The last couple of ones I've involved with on the county side and the city side yielded north of 20. I would say, of that group, it's, sometimes less than 10 that are like really good, credible, perceived to be good fit people. And I don't want to, eat my words, to your point, but I do, all things being equal in other places I'm involved with, I think it's got a little bit more going for it in terms of that national repute that other places don't have of the same size and the same budget in the same place in New York. And I think that will be a net positive in terms of interest. I just do, I'm pretty sure of that.
Robert and then George. Did you have your hand up, George?
I'll make a comment.
Well, I was
Yeah.
recognizing Robert and then George.
Thank you. This maybe is a question for you, maybe it's a question for you, Shelley, I'm not sure. Kind of following up on Jeff's point. Because to your earlier comment, it is a very tight labor market right now, right? Would we have, the more I think about this, the more I think it's probably a Shelley question, sorry, but do we have the authority, per like civil service law and all that stuff to extend, you recommend to be in a 30-day like a 30-day opening to the posting to let candidates percolate in. If we only ended up with like 4 competitive candidates, we can, okay.
The way I've constructed, that's a great question. I should have said this. The way it may not even be, something that's prescribed per se, but what I've done is the verbiage I think is important. I said that, first review of applications could be. So, because you also don't, all of a sudden I just discover it and you're at day 33 and I'm a rock star candidate. Now, I don't want to talk out both sides of my mouth. I say that, but you also want to get down to it. And, you want to get moving on it. But I guess you just want to allow for a late entry, but do it professionally and ethically.
Right.
And I think there's ways to do that. And the way I've done it is something like first review of applications will be whenever. Because you don't ever want to get a situation of a really good solid candidate. You got a strict deadline, comes in after, and also you got this tumult on council and politics, and maybe they know somebody, and you're like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? This is a great application, but it came in 2 days late when we said there's a deadline.
Right.
I just don't want to have you get down that road.
No, we don't want to be hamstringing ourselves.
And since the market has gotten so bad.
You need to come up to the.
Sorry. Sorry, and since the market has gotten so bad, we have started to post open until filled with the anticipation of the first round, and similar to what you're saying, first round of interviews in a particular week. So.
That's actually a good wrinkle, because I think that it gets at a question that you're gonna get anyways. You might as well get out in front of that, it speaks to your timeline, it speaks to your process, it speaks to your hope for things. Hey, plan for, if I'm gonna apply, I think I'm a really good candidate, I'm planning for that date, because they're letting me know that that's probably gonna be the date. I also think one last thing, I'm sorry to interrupt your time, that we talked about money, and I think to get around the money issue is important, and to be where you should maybe be on a salary is important. Money isn't the end all be all for candidates, but I think it's a small separator in terms of what you might get if you're out there at a certain rate of pay and versus where you might have to be. And I have no idea if you've talked about that or what that might look like. Internal equity is something that you want to factor in. What's your highest level department person make, and do you want to make this person pay less or more than that? I mean, 9 times out of 10, it's city manager with the operational responsibilities and expectations is usually the highest paid individual appointee of the city or the county. So give that some thought. And don't shortcut it either. I mean, I think, don't trip over quarters to pick up pennies. I think it's an important job that you don't wanna, swing and miss on as far as, the dollars and cents.
No offense. But the pool of jokes, city manager jokes is weak.
No offense taken. Did you expect that they would be strong?
I don't want to cut discussion short, but Phoebe, if you have a comment or question.
Yeah, I have a question because, when I look at, trying to get teachers of color to come up and even apply for positions here. So, I have a strong need of wanting to make sure we have enough Black and brown candidates to choose from. And I know when attracting people to this community many times, how have there been any thinking going in around that? Because it's real important that we also have them to feel excited about coming to work here, right? And in that, I still think about what happened with the chief of police, right? So how are we going to inspire people of color to want to work in the city of Riverview?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Well, at least in the role that I would play. So one of those entities that I did not reference is, there's actually two entities that serve as conduits to try to get people of color interested in the profession, aware of professional opportunities, and on the career track of local government management. So one is a national forum, NFPBA, a National Forum for Black Public Administrators. The other one is the LGHN, which is the Local Government Hispanic Network. So I have connections in both of those places. The other one is I have a personal connection with HBCUs and MPA programs. So I teach at North Carolina Central, which is a HBCU. The HBCUs, there's about 6 or 10 of them that have an ICMA student chapter. So they have ICMA student chapter alumni who then stay involved. So I've made it a point to make outreach to them. Just on a non-executive search level, I do a lot of that anyways, because the profession looks a lot like me, probably a little bit older, and that's kind of your stereotypical city county manager, quite frankly, right? So I think that the profession as a whole has work to do with respect to that. But I always say the profession doesn't hire themselves. So the council needs to make a point of emphasis, right? And also, so where I sit, just the last point on where I sit is like, well, what can my role in that be, right? It is making maybe underrepresented in the profession communities aware of an opportunity where I'm involved in it. So I do that with my consultant hat. And then just my practitioner hat, I personally made a point to try to, I set up scholarships. I have a mentorship program for those particular communities, so they would be introduced to the profession period. So I think with, people might say other things that I don't know what they do, but what I'm involved with, I think that we would be making outreach to those places and for those people more so than otherwise would be the case. I hope that answered your question.
And can I just say what I think is critical in terms of what Ian just said is he's built those relationships. So it's not like all of a sudden he has a vacancy, so he's going where he's never been before. He has strong relationships in those communities, so that makes a difference.
HBCU, historically black.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, sorry. I told you I speak in afternoon.
Okay, well, thank you, Ian, for taking this time with us tonight. Very productive presentation, very productive conversation, questions from council. I too am very excited about this opportunity. I'll just channel Phoebe here and say that there are opportunities and there are challenges, but this is a pretty exciting time for the city of Etude. We are excited about moving forward with this change in our city government that will be far better for our community, for our city, for our taxpayers, for our residents as a whole. So we will look forward to future conversations with Ian. There will be engagement of council as we move forward. July 12th is a next committee of the whole meeting. There will be a draft of the contract shared with council prior to that. But it's definitely forward momentum. And tonight is a good step in that forward momentum. So any closing comments?
No, great dialogue, great discussion, took a lot of notes, and thank you all for what you do, for the city, and thanks for your comments for the purpose of this discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now we're all gonna move into adjourn. Robert, second, Jorge, all those in favor of adjourning? Thank you, and that passes 9-0.